Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is a Thursday edition of Point of View, and we're so grateful you can join us. Hope you'll stay with us for 2 hours, because the first hour we're going to talk about the persecuted church and really zero in on one particular country where this is taking place. But again, it is illustrative of all sorts of things that are happening around the country. And we are going to be also talking a little bit, since the expert that's in studio with us has been somebody that's helped us with many of our trips to Israel. We have one coming up in Greece, so we'll talk about that a little bit later, because I know some of you wanted to know more information about that. Next hour, we're going to get into a couple of issues in the news. Senate voted, surprisingly, to do away with the vaccine mandate. Now, whether that makes its way through the House, we'll talk about in about an hour. Also, a lot of evidence now that the 12 major cities in the United States all have set all-time homicide records, and how that affects the issue of gun control and all sorts of other issues. And our good friend Paul Kenger, who is with us oftentimes, has a very good piece that we've posted today on critical race theory. And so those are just a few of many topics we will address next hour. But first of all, let me introduce our guest in studio. We also have one by phone. Paul Barreca has been with us many times before. He is the director of Fellowship International Mission, actually has been a pastor 33 different years as well, in churches in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Michigan, to mention a few. We've talked about his book, Follow the Master, How Jesus Made Disciples, and Follow the Master, a discipleship course in growing Christians, a graduate of Word of Life Bible Institute, Lancaster Bible College, Michigan Theological Seminary, and most recently earned his doctorate from Clark Summit University. The list goes on, but it is great, brother, to have you in studio with us today.
Thank you, Kirby. Great to be with you. Great to be in Texas in December, where it's a lot warmer than it is in the Northeast. And so we're having a great time here. We were at the pre-trib conference just a few days ago with some scholars and ministry leaders, and heard a lot of great teaching and scholarly papers on prophecy, which was great. But we're happy to be here today and to be talking about our persecuted brothers and sisters, particularly in Nigeria, as you mentioned, and many opportunities to go there and to visit some of these folks. FIM has missionaries in Nigeria, and got to see firsthand what some of them are going through. So glad to be able to talk about those things today.
If you look at the list that is published by Open Doors of the countries where the greatest persecution takes place, number one, as you know, is North Korea. Then the next 8 are all Muslim countries, and one of those is Nigeria.
Correct.
Now making its way into number 10 is India. And by the way, I had some Indian missionaries in my Sunday school class, and I want them to meet you this Sunday, as a matter of fact, that have actually talked about that. Not so much anti-Christian as pro-Hindu, but let's get into Nigeria for just a minute. Give us some facts, because I think most people would not realize how significant Nigeria is as a country in Africa.
That's right, Kirby. And you're not hearing it in the news, but there is indeed a severe persecution of Christians happening in Nigeria today. And one of the things that makes this such a vital interest to Christians is the size of Nigeria. Most folks probably don't know Nigeria is by far the most populated nation in Africa.
Amazing.
206 million was the population count in 2020. That's almost twice of the nearest country, which would be Ethiopia with 114 million and Egypt with 102 million. So it's a massive country, even though it's not the largest in size and land space in Africa. It is the most populated. It's in Central Africa, and it's on the West African coast. So if you remember Africa and then kind of that belly in the middle of Africa, if you go right into the centerpiece of that belly, that's where Nigeria would be. And of course, it's rich in oil and rich in minerals, and for that reason, it has been a country of particular interest. It's also a country, because the center of Africa, most of North Africa, is dominated by Islam. And many of those countries are countries that would practice Sharia law. They would be caliphate-type countries, so much persecution and many terror cells going on in those countries. The South has been more Christian. Now, when we talk about Africa and Christian countries in Africa, please, I think we've got a separate idea of the church you go to in your Sunday school class, and that.
Yes.
When we say Christian, it's kind of more ethnic or political Christianity.
I understand.
Now, many of those would be born again folks, but it would include many different denominations and so on. And so the interesting thing about that is Nigeria is right in between these two predominant worlds, the Muslim world in the north, and indeed Nigeria has what they call in Nigeria the Middle Belt. And so it's that region right through the middle of Nigeria, and it marks the demarcation between the North Muslim area and the South Christian area. And in the Middle Belt, those Middle Belt states are where we are seeing so much of the persecution. Our FIM missionary that's going to join us in a few minutes, Dennis Shelly, was ministering in a seminary in one of those Middle Belt states. And so in Nigeria, there are about 80 million who identify themselves as Christians. And in one particular denomination, predominantly in the north, where it's, of course, more dangerous to be a Christian, the Churches of ECWA, ECWA, stands for Evangelical Church Winning All. There are, on any given Sunday, about 10 million Christians just in this one Christian denomination.
Wow.
And it's a conservative Christian denomination. It is the churches that were formed by SIM missionaries in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. And then they formed their own Nigerian denomination. And, I broke away from the SIM identity. So right now, the situation in Nigeria and all of that kind of background to give our listeners an idea of what's going on. The prior president, prior to 2015, was Jonathan Goodluck. And Goodluck was, many have testified that he was a firm Christian believer. And he was doing a lot of very good things in terms of fairness and equality, not just for Christians, but for all of Nigerians. In 2015, with the help of the Obama administration, a Muslim leader by the name of Buhari, he became the president. Interesting, David Axelrod, who ran Obama's two campaigns as his campaign director, went to Nigeria for 6 months and campaigned and ran the campaign for, or influenced the campaign for Buhari. So Buhari is a Fulani Muslim, and he is allowing an intense persecution going on right now against Christians.
And we've talked about the Fulani Muslims, but when we come back from the break, I want to get into a little more detail about that as well, because you might then, of course, wonder, first of all, what's the government doing to help persecuted Christians? We, of course, have Voice of the Martyrs and Open Doors and other groups on here. And, of course, today we have Fellowship International Mission with us. And then I also want to talk with Dr. Dennis Shelly, because he's been teaching at the Nigerian Bible College, and give us kind of a on-the-scene look at what is taking place. So, talking about the persecuted church in general, focusing today on Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa, one of, unfortunately, the top 10 countries where Christians are greatly persecuted, and something we thought you would like to know about. A little bit later, as I said, we'll talk about some other issues with Paul Barreca, because certainly we have a lot to cover, not the least of which is maybe the next trip we'll be taking next fall that you might like to know about. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation and add another voice to our mix right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Have you noticed an increase in climate alarmism in the news? Pundits, politicians, and activists are predicting a global catastrophe on the horizon that requires immediate and expensive action before the planet is doomed. A helpful antidote to all the doom and gloom is the book Unsettled: What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters by Dr. Stephen Koonin. He is difficult to label as a climate denier. Early in his book, he acknowledges that it's true that the globe is warming and that humans are exerting a warming influence upon it. He can't be pegged as a right-wing activist since he has served as the Undersecretary for Science in the U.S. Department of Energy in the Obama administration. Before that, he was a professor of physics at Caltech and served as Caltech's vice president and provost. He reminds his readers that research literature and government reports say that heat waves in the U.S. are now no more common than they were in 1900, and that the warmest temperatures in the U.S. have not risen in the past 50 years. He then follows that statement with three others that would surprise most Americans. One, humans have had no detectable impact on hurricanes over the past century. Two, Greenland's ice sheet is not shrinking any more rapidly today than it was 80 years ago. And three, the net economic impact of human-induced climate change will be minimal through at least the end of the century. He's also skeptical of the computer models used to forecast future climate change. If these models can't retroactively predict events that have already happened, why should we trust their prediction for the future? His book reminds us that the science isn't settled, and we need some humility about what we don't know. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Conversation today is about the persecuted church, in particular focusing on the country of Nigeria, although this applies to so many other countries. And really the great challenge for missions in the 21st century is the challenge of getting Christians into Muslim countries or equipping various Muslims who become Christians to actually reach their own country. So I think you will appreciate this. We have in studio with us, of course, the Director of Fellowship International Mission, Paul Barreca, Dr. Paul Barreca. And let me now introduce as well by phone Dr. Dennis Shelly, and he is an individual that has taught at a Nigerian Bible college for 11 years and also can help us understand a little bit more about ECWA, Evangelical Church Winning All, the national church that was established by SIM, used to be called Sudan Interior Mission, of course, a long time ago. He has, of course, been an FIM mission advocate, and so Dr. Shelly, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
You're welcome.
Let's, if we can, just before we get into some of the specifics of what the teaching was, you left off, Paul, by talking about what happened. And again, this is sort of one of those scandals where this previous administration, I guess you have to go back to the Obama administration, tried to influence an election in Israel, also tried to influence an election in Nigeria. So a lot of people might be wondering, okay, what's the U.S. government doing now since the current president was vice president under Barack Obama? So what's going on?
Well, Kirby, the Biden administration in November, just a few weeks ago, removed Nigeria from what is called a country of particular concern. That list is a U.S. generated list of countries that are involved in violations of human rights and religious rights. And what was devastating about this is that persecution of Christians in Nigeria is increasing. And at the same time, the Biden administration says, oh, there's no problem here. And it is a cause of great concern for many advocates of religious liberty around the world. And you also notice that maybe some of your listeners are saying, well, I didn't know that there's genocide going on in Nigeria right now, but there really is. And so in addition to the Biden administration, you also have the U.S. media that is not speaking about this at all, because it really doesn't fit the narrative that they're advocating for.
Dennis Shelly, let me come to you for just a minute. You've been a seminary professor, really, since 1977, 33 years in Bible and missionary teaching and all of the rest. But can you give us an update of what's on the ground there? You've taught at these various seminaries, and this might be news to our listeners that there are even various Christian seminaries in a country like Nigeria. Can you kind of give us some of the background?
Yes, there are a good number of Christian seminaries, Baptist, ECWA, Anglican, others, Catholic, and others are there in different parts of the country. Back to just help a little more for ECWA, they have actually about 10,000 churches in Nigeria, along with about 8,000 pastors. Then they have an evangelical mission society that has about 4,000 missionaries. Most of them are couples in about 16 countries around the world, including here in the States. So some of our seminary graduates from Kagoro Seminary are a part of that missions outreach, and it's very exciting. It's not easy for them, but we thank God for His grace moving many of these forward.
Talk a little bit about that seminary where you did teach there for 13 years. For example, the number of students, where they've gone now, how we can pray for them, those kinds of things.
Okay, we have about 600 students in all of our programs, from the basic English on up to our new PhD program. But because of the virus, the COVID restrictions, and recent threats on the seminary from Fulani militia, the seminary had to move to online courses. Then we have a weak and irregular phone and internet system there in our area. This has been difficult for those studies. Yet they had a low-key graduation on November 27th for over 120 students. And we thank God that they were safe during that activity. But the exciting thing is that the seminary is training students for ministries as pastors, missionaries, lay ministries, and Christian religious knowledge teachers. Nigeria, compared to America, has many more freedoms because some of our BA graduates can teach Bible courses in the public elementary and high schools.
Amazing.
And I've challenged all of our students, no matter what their major, let them be missions-minded pastors, missionaries, teachers, and lay leaders.
Let's, if we can, maybe focus, and this will be sort of a difficult part here, and just a program note for anybody who has children listening, but I do want to focus on persecution, and you do have some very tragic stories of individuals that you've worked with or known that have actually been killed through some of the persecution. Can you share some of those?
Yes, a lot of these things have happened just within the last year or year and a half. One of our missions department graduates in mid-December of 2020 lost his parents, a brother, a sister, and his little boy of about 6 years old in a Fulani herdsman militia attack in mid-December. And in that village, about 30 homes were burnt during that same attack. Then other students and staff have had challenges. One of the students got in a newspaper article recently in Nigeria. It was Reverend Silas Yakubu Ali. He was an ECWA pastor from Kaduna State, about 20 or more miles from Kagoro Seminary, and he was killed as he was coming back. His motorcycle broke down, and as he was pushing it back home, they killed him. And he was a Kagoro Seminary graduate who was doing his MA studies. Some of our staff have also lost their homes and property this year. Others have been killed when they went to their farms to try to harvest some of their crops. One of our students also was kidnapped. So these are many challenges that our students are facing and our brethren there, because they're subsistence farmers for most of them.
Right.
They have to go and farm. If they don't go and farm, or their crops have been destroyed, or they can't get out, it's very difficult for them. And this is the food that they harvest is what they sell for a little cash, or what they eat during the year. So it's not been easy for many of them.
You know, Paul, one of the things we have done on this program, I think we even talked about the tragic death of Reverend Ali, whose motorcycle broke down and was killed. And we've talked about the attacks of the Fulani herdsmen and those kinds of things. So this is a dangerous place. But I think you have traveled there, and you certainly have missionaries there. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, particularly in the south, which is the area from Jos, which is one of those middle belt cities. Jos, not the capital. The capital is Lagos. Pronounce that for me, Dennis. I'm sorry.
Yes, Lagos.
Lagos. Thank
Lagos.
you. But Jos is in the middle, and things south of in Jos and south are very dangerous. Jos, a number of years ago in the early 2000s, was a place of tremendous attack by a different group called Boko Haram,
Right.
But it is dangerous. And so when I was with Dennis in Nigeria and with some of Dennis's, some of FIM other missionaries, we were said, hey, on this road, maybe a few weeks ago, there was a kidnapping or a carjacking or these kinds of things. So it is a dangerous place. The Christians there live in constant fear. There is great apprehension because they are hearing of all of these villages that have been attacked, and they just don't know if their village perhaps might be next.
Yes. And again, we are talking today with two individuals associated with Fellowship International Mission. Let me, as we go to a break, encourage you to go to the website. When we come back, I want to talk about this great opportunity for you maybe to certainly pray for those individuals who are missionaries, not only in places like Nigeria, but all over the world where FIM have missionaries. And if you'd like to know more about that, maybe you'd like to support a missionary, maybe you'd like to become a missionary, because we're really focusing on missions today as well as persecuted Christians, you can go to our website, pointofview.net, or just simply go to FIM, which stands for Fellowship International Mission, FIM.org. You'll see a picture there of Paul Barreca and a very good little video that you can watch. Matter of fact, you might even hit the share button and put it on your Facebook page and tell some other people about the conversation we're having. And as you go to the website, don't forget, first of all, my Viewpoints commentary today, which we will talk about a little bit later in the next hour, based on the very good book Unsettled and the whole issue of climate change and those kinds of issues. Our take action item today is, as we just mentioned, and we'll talk more about next hour, the idea of the vote against the vaccine mandate in the Senate. Well, the next thing the Senate's going to do is decide whether or not to vote for the Build Back Better Act. And so if you have not had a chance to contact your two United States senators, I would encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net, click on the Take Action button. As long as you know your zip code, you put that in, it'll pop up the names of your two United States senators. We have a suggested message. You can edit it any way you want, and then hit send, and you will have done your civic duty. So we have a lot on the website, pointofview.net. We'll have more right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Topic this hour, we're talking about the persecuted church and focusing a lot of attention on Nigeria, which is, of course, the most populous country in Africa and very illustrative of what's going on in other parts of the world, but also because the mainstream media, the government media, and even the establishment media just have not really covered this story, and we like to cover stories that should be covered and are not. And part of this has to do with the issue of religious liberty and persecution, and so sometimes they don't cover those stories well anyway. But as you'll find out in just a minute, I think there's even an attempt to tamp down some of these stories. So you need to know about this. And we're privileged to have in studio with us Dr. Paul Barreca, director of the Fellowship International Mission, as well as Dr. Dennis Shelly, who has been a professor and seminary professor for all these years there in these Bible colleges. And Dennis, let me come back to you for just a minute, because we were talking about the dangers that individuals, your friends, neighbors, co-workers, other fellow pastors face. We're talking about, of course, persecution that involves kidnapping, murder, even as you were talking about the crops, just even the destruction of property. You might have a situation in which an individual maybe was not personally harmed, but their economic ability to survive has been damaged by these Fulani herdsmen, or in the past by Boko Haram. Is that fair?
Yes, the story is too. I would have too many stories of close people. Even the situation in about 50 miles radius of Kagoro Seminary, they have 3 internally displaced people camps because of the troubles in Miango and Zongon Kataf and around that area. Over 35,000 IDPs have had to flee to these camps for safety. And so
yes,
Kagoro Seminary, along with some of our supporters, has really done a great job sending over some thousands of dollars to be of help for food. I think we've helped probably about 50 or more families who have had their houses burnt, that we have been able to buy some roofing sheet, and we've made some faces very, very happy. For example, one of the ladies, she wrote back, she lost her house, her roof, it was burnt. She said, "I lack words to express my gratitude. The help came as a shocking surprise. All hope had gone after the Fulani attack and destruction. I'm eternally grateful to the donors." So we're hearing some smiles on and some hope for these people, which is a big challenge and an encouragement to us, because their faith is very, very strong. If I may add, let me just say one thing, that this sounds so bad. I asked our provost, has any good come out of this? And he said that more people are turning to Christ, back to God fully, to focus on Him. Some are throwing away their idols and not returning to their traditional idols for protection. More Christians are realizing that the church is one and not so divided. Prayer groups are forming to trust the Lord more. And even the provost said, to have a day or night that's peaceful is a bonus. Our lives can go at any time. So they're trusting the Lord to take care of them, and surely a challenge to us.
Paul, I was just thinking about the fact how many times we said that oftentimes the church grows in the midst of persecution, and so that is certainly the case. Dennis, I want to get a couple more questions from you, and then we're going to move on to some other topics. But the first question that's certainly in everybody's mind is, well, where's the Nigerian government in all of this? We did hear, of course, that the president is probably a lot less sympathetic to Christians, but has there been any statement by the government about this, or any action? Can you help us with that?
Almost every time, Kirby, that there's trouble like this, you see a newspaper article. If you Google, and they have a little part saying, oh, the Governor El Rifai, who is a Fulani, and the president, especially the governor in Kaduna State where we are, they have, he condemns all of this, but it doesn't go any further than that. And even close to Jos, there's a big army base, and this is all the trouble around them. They just don't seem to be, they're kind of looking the other way, and the Christians are very frustrated. They don't know what to do. but and it's desperate for many of them. So they say their best weapon is prayer, and I believe that. But I hope that we, even today, can do some things to move on and put some pressure to help the government do better for them.
Let me just mention, we do have a link to fim.org. Some of you might want to help. Certainly, I would encourage you to pray, but some of you might want to give. Paul, in the past, have actually raised money through what was called the Cradle Fund to help various ministries that were in these refugee camps. And we're not putting together an organized pattern here this time, but giving people an opportunity to support a missionary or to actually give. And we'll talk more about that in terms of Nigerian persecution. But I just said a minute ago, and you got to tell me if I'm right or wrong, it does seem to me that there might even be a deliberate attempt not to cover this in terms of the establishment media, given the way the establishment media covered, for example, the genocide in Rwanda. You almost never hear about what's going on in Nigeria. What about that?
That's right. This is not being spoken of. There's another story recently where an Epoch Times news reporter by the name of Luca Biniat is under arrest for insubordination and insurrection in Nigeria for simply reporting on what's going on. He appeared on the Lara Logan show on Fox Nation, and immediately after that, he was arrested by the Nigerian government. And the U.S. media, being silent about this, may be presenting an opportunity for an even greater crisis, because what has begun to happen is some of the villages are taking reprisal against Fulani herdsmen. And so you kind of have two things going on in the Christian community in Nigeria. You have many Nigerian Christians trying to reach the Fulani with the gospel. But at the same time, some of these nominal Christian villages are just worried about their lives and their property. And they're going, and for example, just a few weeks ago, one village went and killed 50 cows from the Fulani. Well, to a Fulani herdsman, a cow is of equal value with a child. Mm-hmm. So these kinds of reprisals. There have been villages that have beat to death Fulani herdsmen, and there may be another Rwanda on the way.
I fear that.
Unless the Nigerian government is able to come in and restore peace and justice and take care of all Nigerians, both Fulani and Muslim, but also Christians as well.
Dennis, maybe talk for just a minute about what you think our listeners, and we have listeners all over the United States, but also, of course, many people listen in or watch the video later on in other parts of the world. But what can they do in light of some of the things you've been sharing today?
I think, first of all, if they can continue to pray more faithfully for our Christians there to be coping with all this trauma and loss. If there's an attack today, it might be peaceful next week, and then they don't know when the next one will be without any protection from the government or the police. So prayer, and also giving financially to our relief fund. The seminary is overseeing that. We have a relief fund for persecuted Christians that's on the FIM website. Also, our student scholarship fund, even for a student, even for like $200 or so, helps to pay for a semester for a student. And many of them are not able to pay even that. So we have a work scholarship project and a fund, and then students can work on campus some toward their school fees. So those two funds are good ways to be of help.
I might just mention, Paul, when people go to fim.org, click on the button that says Give, and then they can scroll down and find that section that relates to this issue of persecution. And if nothing else, Dr. Dennis Shelly, I appreciate you being with us today. Thank you in some respects for being our eyes and ears there in Nigeria, and I certainly encourage people to pray for you and your family.
Thank you very much.
Just before we go to a break, let's once again talk about that. When we come back from the break, I thought maybe we'd talk about some of the other places where you're helping the persecuted church. One of those is Afghanistan. Number one is North Korea. Number two is Afghanistan. And of course, in the top 10 is Nigeria as well. So I do want to talk about that. But also, we have a great website that you can find. You can either click on the picture of Paul Barreca or Dennis Shelly. Both of those will take you to fim.org, or you can go there directly. And so we want to talk about what you're doing in some of these other countries. But I know before I let Paul go in this hour, there are going to be some people saying, Are you going to do another trip to Greece? We get that question all the time. And the answer is, if everything works out, we've had to cancel a couple of Israel trips, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
But looks like we might actually have one to Greece and Turkey, we hope. And this would be an opportunity to actually walk where Paul walked, the footsteps of Paul. Such a great ministry. And we have been there before, but we've been to places like Philippi and Corinth and Athens and Berea and Thessalonica. But this time we might even get a chance to go into Turkey and go to Ephesus and some other things. So we're going to talk about that in case you were wondering what the future is, and you might start allocating some time in the, I guess it'd be late September. We'll talk about that in just a minute for that. But we need to take a break, and we're privileged to have in the studio with us for a few more minutes Paul Barreca with Fellowship International Mission. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and we're privileged to have in studio with us for a little bit longer Dr. Paul Barreca, and give you some action items. We certainly are all about action items. I think we've already given you a few. But Paul, first of all, let's, if we can, talk about what Fellowship International Mission is doing with other people in the persecuted church.
Well, one area in particular is Afghanistan refugees. And of course, we all watched with great sadness and horror as Kabul fell, and those folks were just trying to get out of Afghanistan in any way. There still is a massive migration out of Afghanistan of believers. They're not flying on airplanes anymore. They are trying to get across the border. And so FIM is working with other organizations ministering in those countries on the border of Afghanistan, some of the other stands, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and some of the other stand countries, to minister to those refugees that are gathering there. There are also maybe you may or not know this, there are 20,000 refugees, Afghanistan refugees in San Antonio, Texas.
Wow.
They're crammed into hotels and apartments, and they are just looking for any help they can get. And one of our missionaries is there ministering with those folks and with churches and trying to get assistance in any way and also share the gospel, because these folks their worldview has been turned upside down. And many of them, for the first time, are receiving messages and love and help from Christians who they thought all of their lives, they were taught to believe that Christians are trying to kill them. And they find out, no, it's Muslims that are trying to kill them. And they cross the border, they come to America, they are evacuated, and they discover that Christians are trying to help them and love them. Mm-hmm. And boy, that is a great opportunity for the gospel.
And again, we've talked with Joel Rosenberg about the fact probably more Muslims have become Christians in the last decade or two than in the last almost 1,500 years. So again, It is amazing how that has played itself out. Yes. So again, we've talked about prayer. What about this idea of giving again? And certainly how maybe people can not only support Fellowship International Mission, but also some of these other groups that we talk about.
That's right. And we do need to be careful with how we give, because there are some organizations that, because of our empathy and our compassion, they may not be using these funds. They may be kind of pigtailing off of these crises to raise funds for themselves. So at FIM, for humanitarian funds, our organization does not withhold any operating funds.
Right.
All of the 100% of the gift is given to the people in need. So we have funds going on in Nigeria, but some other trustworthy organizations that you've already mentioned, the Cradle Fund. We would also mention persecution.org. That's the Voice of the Martyrs. And they have a number of projects, particularly in Nigeria. SIM.org, that used to be Sudan Interior Mission, but SIM.org also is a trusted organization where you might be able to give and know that your funds are going not to promote the organization, but to give directly to those Christians who have needs.
And I just mentioned that when you were talking about your organization, I'll pat you on the back a little bit, but was it Ministry Watch listed you as a shining light ministry? And so again, that's a really tremendous accolade to the kind of way in which you work very scrupulously to deal with those funds in an effective way. But just before we get into some other issues, I noticed you have a couple Bible verses here that maybe would be ones that people could write down and use as they pray, or maybe even pass on to others to encourage them to pray.
Well, we're encouraged in Scripture to remember those who are in the persecuted church. I think one verse in particular it brings to mind is Hebrews 13, verse 3. The author of Hebrews says this: "Remember those who were in prison, as though in prison with them, and those who are mistreated, since you also are in the body." And I'm convinced, and I think most commentators and most Bible scholars would say, that the prison is certainly not Christians who are in prison because they've done something wrong. 1 Peter 3 says, what credit is it if you're punished for doing something wrong? But these are people who are in prison because of their faith.
Yes.
And the author of Hebrews is writing to Hebrew Christians who were really being, they were facing a crisis. Do I keep my Christian faith even if it means persecution? Mm-hmm. And so remember those who are in prison. Remember the persecuted church. I think also the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul spent much of his ministry in prison. He was in prison at Caesarea Maritima, where we visited several times on the Mediterranean coast, Herod's port that was also a place of imprisonment for Paul in the dungeon. And then he was in prison in Rome for 2 years. He was released, and then he became a prisoner again, an imprisonment that eventually left to his death. And Paul writes to us in Colossians. Paul treated his imprisonment as ordained of God. He recognized the injustice. He didn't want anybody else to be imprisoned, but he also realized that God had him there for a purpose. In Colossians 4:18, for example, he says, "I, Paul, write this greeting with my own hand. Remember my chains." The book of Philippians was written from prison, and he encourages the Philippian church to remember to pray for him. So I think as believers in Jesus Christ here in the United States, at the current moment, we still have a pretty large degree of religious freedom. But as we know, that is not guaranteed. That may come, it may go, it may change through whether it's vaccine mandates or government intrusion on the church or losing religious liberties in some ways. But while we have this freedom, I believe we need to use it for God, for good opportunity. And I think that means certainly praying for the persecuted church when we can. And I think we all should be involved in giving to the persecuted church and to remember those who are in chains. Kirby, if I could just say one thing I appreciate about Point of View is that you give your listeners not just information about the world, but what can we do about it? And so listen and tune into Point of View to get not only the information about the world, but your action points as well.
And let me just mention that you have kind of a 3-page summary of this. So if somebody said, I'd like to pass this on to my missions pastor or something like that, they could contact you through FIM.
That's right.
But we only have about a minute or two left. I thought we might just say that we are planning, Lord willing, with all the details that come about, to have a trip to Greece and Turkey. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Well, I think a lot of our listeners are saying, man, I've been having my travel plans and vacation plans. I've not been able to do anything. We think we've got a good opportunity for you in September, late September 2022, a Bible tour visit. Bible tour vacation where you're going to be hearing from Kirby and from myself and from our Christian guide there in Greece and also in Turkey. So we're really tracing the footsteps of Paul, both his ministry in Ephesus and then also in Greece as well. So we'll be seeing, for example, the island of Patmos, the church in Ephesus, some other places in Corinth as well, and a little vacation time on Santorini Island, not a place of great biblical significance, but a nice place to go and put your feet in the Mediterranean. So that's coming late September, and we are working through the details and trying to make sure that COVID doesn't close this one down.
Well, again, I know there have been many people wanting to know about that, and I thought I'd just wait till you were here in Dallas to talk about that. We've partnered with you before, and it's worked out very well, and people always want to know everything from dates, cost, and everything else, and of course, we'll get more of that information out there. I always tell people, if you're worried about cost, ours is always less expensive than most of the others, because we're here to help you, not to make money, and I think you will really benefit from that. And it has been fun. Every time I teach on 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians or Philippians or Ephesians or whatever, just have the pictures, and it's something to be right there. So I'm always enjoying the opportunity to co-labor and co-minister with you. And thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kirby. Great to be with you, and appreciate the focus on the persecuted church today. It's very appropriate, and as we come to the Christmas season and think about all of God's blessings, I think it's a great opportunity for us to help those who are suffering for their faith.
Let's take a break. When we come back, first of all, we gave you some action items. You can go to FIM.org, or you don't even have to remember that because that link is there. We have my Viewpoints commentary. We have our take action items today. And if you find yourself saying, I'd like to pass this on to others, you can simply go to the website, download the podcast or the feed, and send it to someone else. So it's all there at the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
As we're going to get back into some of the issues in the news, first thing we'll talk about in just a minute is the Senate vote to actually do away with the vaccine mandate for the private sector. That comes on the heels of a ruling that came down recently from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that had a temporary injunction against the mandate, and then just a week later upheld that ruling. And so you have a situation right now where at the moment the mandate through OSHA is stayed, at least nationally. The others through CMS is enjoined, and through contractors is federal employees. We'll talk about that in just a minute. The military, a little different, and we will maybe spend some time talking about that tomorrow with Kelly Shackelford, since he's been paying attention to that. Moving forward somewhat, but the unvaxxed are flagged, which means they're blocked from promotion and re-enlistment, so we'll talk about that probably with him tomorrow. Did want to cover this for a few minutes. Don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but other than to say it was a bit of a surprise. You always get the sense that right now, given the fact that it's a 50-50 split, but always where that 50-50 split can be broken with a tie-breaking vote by the Vice President, Kamala Harris, that essentially, in a very limited way, the Democrats control the Senate. Democrats do control the House, and of course you have a Democrat in the Oval Office, so primarily most of the levers of power are held by Democrats. And if indeed President Joe Biden issues a vaccine mandate, you would assume that everybody, at least in his party, would go along with that. That was not the case. Wednesday night, the U.S. Supreme Court voted 52-48 to do away with the vaccine mandate for private businesses that have 100 or more employees. Now, it only necessarily needed a simple majority to pass, but again, you always wonder what else would might have happened if it went the other direction. But you had at least two Democrats, so let's give them some visibility. Senator John Tester, who's a Democrat from Montana, and Senator Joe Manchin, who is the senator from West Virginia. And by joining those other 50 Republicans, it passed 52-48. Now, the person that spearheaded that, if you want to give credit, was Senator Mike Braun, who is the senator, Republican senator from Indiana. He posted a tweet, came out just earlier today. No one should be forced to choose between getting a vaccine and losing their job. This mandate puts millions of livelihoods and every American's freedoms at stake. President Biden must heed the message of the Senate sent tonight by a bipartisan vote. That's a little overplayed because you only got two Democrats, but okay, it is true, and abandon this overreach. So this is, again, something that may now make its way back to the House. And first of all, let me just explain that this has been something that's been in the works for some time. And again, the first article we've posted, if you'd like to read it in its entirety, goes through this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the vaccine mandate other than just to simply say this was a bit of a surprise to me. The Senate Republicans, by the way, had tried to actually tie this idea of the vaccine mandates and preventing that to the continuing resolution funding that was necessary to keep the government going. Let me once again remind you, this Congress and previous Congresses haven't passed a budget in years. So this is simply a continuing resolution, just simply saying, well, just keep funding that. And there were some attempts to do that. Again, let's give some credit to Senators Mike Lee, he's a Republican from Utah, Senator Robert Marshall from Kansas. They had an amendment to put there, but it failed. And so that didn't go any further. There was an attempt to do the same thing in the House of Representatives. The Republicans in that case were Representative Chip Roy, who's a Republican from Texas, and some of the other House Freedom Caucus members tried to do that, but that's the case. Now, the resolution, which comes from the Senate, not likely to pass the House, and even if it did, which I can't see that it would, it could necessarily be vetoed by President Biden. So it's kind of a moral stand, but it isn't necessarily going to be binding in the way that people would like. But I know that a lot of you are obviously and should be concerned about the vaccine mandate, because even if you have been vaccinated, even if you think the vaccine is a good idea, as many people do, to require individuals to do that and to say you will be losing your job over it seems like one additional step. I've heard, but I haven't checked it out myself, but maybe some of you, if you want to call in, can tell me if this is true, that if you look at the, I think it's the latest Webster's Dictionary, the definition of anti-vax includes not only people that don't want to be vaccinated, but people that disagree with a vaccine mandate. And if that's the case, you can kind of get the sense real quickly that we've sort of moved the goalposts or changed the ideas of what being anti-vax really means. Just to be fair, this article also does give you a quote from the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, who said, "We certainly hope the Senate will stand up to the anti-vaccine and testing crowd. We're going to continue to work to implement these. If it comes to the president's desk, he will veto it." So even if it did pass the House, he promised to veto it. "We've got a new variant. Cases are rising. The president's been clear. We'll use every tool to protect the American people, and we hope others will join us in that effort." So if you are convinced that we shouldn't have this vaccine mandate and people should not lose their jobs because they are hesitant about a vaccine, then you might be encouraged by what has come from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which actually ruled against the mandate. We'll see how this works its way up through the courts, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of that update in what took place in the United States Senate. While we're talking about that, just before we take a break, let me mention, because I probably won't get to it again, that we still have given you an opportunity, if you would want to do so, to contact your two United States senators about the Build Back Better Act. This, we give you lots of facts and figures and information that certainly would cause you to be concerned about that, not the least of which is cost. You can find some of my commentaries where we estimate that we're talking close to $5 trillion, not even close to the less than $2 trillion people say, if you really are honest about this and don't believe the budget gimmicks. But even apart from the money, which we don't have and we'll have to print to make it work, are all the really bad ideas in this. Many of them are what I call toxic ideas. So how can you contact your two senators? Because you probably don't have a lot of time right now, especially it's in the Christmas season, to sit down and write a letter, write an email. We'll simply go to pointofview.net, click on that button that says Take Action, scroll down, and then you can put in your zip code. I just did. Up pops my two United States senators. Then we have right next to it a letter. It's a relatively short letter, and it is one that expresses some of our concerns about what this would do. But you may have some different concerns, or would like to modify it or change it or whatever. Well, you can do that as well. Then if you've done this before, your contact information is already there, and you just hit submit. If this is the very first time you've ever done it, well, again, you just fill out some information, including, of course, your zip code, so they know that you're in that congressional district and also in that particular state, and that's all you need to do. So we've made it very easy for you to fulfill your civic duty, and so that is available to you. When we come back from the break, though, I want to spend some time talking about record high homicide rates, what that means in terms of future gun control, and how that affects you and your family. We have a lot to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Have you noticed an increase in climate alarmism in the news? Pundits, politicians, and activists are predicting a global catastrophe on the horizon that requires immediate and expensive action before the planet is doomed. A helpful antidote to all the doom and gloom is the book Unsettled: What Climate Science Tells Us, What It Doesn't, and Why It Matters by Dr. Stephen Koonin. He is difficult to label as a climate denier. Early in his book, he acknowledges that it's true that the globe is warming and that humans are exerting a warming influence upon it. He can't be pegged as a right-wing activist since he has served as the Undersecretary for Science in the U.S. Department of Energy in the Obama administration. Before that, he was a professor of physics at Caltech and served as Caltech's vice president and provost. He reminds his readers that research literature and government reports say that heat waves in the U.S. are now no more common than they were in 1900, and that the warmest temperatures in the U.S. have not risen in the past 50 years. He then follows that statement with three others that would surprise most Americans. One, humans have had no detectable impact on hurricanes over the past century. Two, Greenland's ice sheet is not shrinking any more rapidly today than it was 80 years ago. And three, the net economic impact of human-induced climate change will be minimal through at least the end of the century. He's also skeptical of the computer models used to forecast future climate change. If these models can't retroactively predict events that have already happened, why should we trust their prediction for the future? His book reminds us that the science isn't settled and we need some humility about what we don't know. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Go deeper on topics like you just heard by visiting pointofview.net. That's pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the booklets that we make available to you is on criminal justice. And, of course, when we wrote it, we recognized that that might have been very important because there was a particular piece of legislation being considered at the time on the issue of changing and reforming some of the issues of criminal justice. That was actually passed under the Trump administration. But I did not anticipate when I wrote that especially in December of 2021, we'd be talking about so much of what many people are starting to call a culture of crime. One of the people that has actually used that phrase is Gary Bauer, who opens yesterday's end-of-day report by saying that Tuesday night, a large Christmas tree outside Fox News studios in Manhattan was set afire. There are, of course, some questions as whether or not it was supposed to be a statement about Fox News or Wall Street Journal because they're in the same building, but nevertheless, these thugs are roaming the streets of New York City, and this issue of criminality and disorder are really spreading. Of course, we've talked already about this individual that attacked a Christmas parade in Wisconsin, killing 6 people and wounding others. And Gary Bauer goes on to talk about some things that the mainstream press, the so-called establishment press, haven't covered. We've had, for example, a number of churches that have been desecrated and vandalized. There is the threat of more arson of these churches, so we will probably talk about that and cover that in the future. And he points out that people committing these crimes are responsible for their actions, but there are other people that have created the culture for this as well, because after all, this did not happen in a vacuum, and this now brings me to my second and third articles we've posted, because when you talk about defunding the police, you can begin to see that that is a problem. And we've talked about the so-called smash and grab kinds of looting taking place. Well, when you have people making excuses for it, he then has a link there to something that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez suggested, that the reporting of all the smash and grab looting was simply a news hoax. Really? You can't make this stuff up. Lori Lightfoot, who's the mayor of Chicago, because we're going to spend some time talking about Chicago in just a minute, actually blamed retailers for not having enough security. And, of course, while you even had this individual attacking the Wisconsin Christmas parade, Rashida Tlaib, one of the squad, actually had used that day, the day after, to actually push for a plan to empty the federal prisons and what ultimately would put more people that are criminals on the street. So this, I think, brings us to our second article, which is something that I wanted you to be aware of, because sometimes people say, maybe this is nothing more than over-reporting. You know, once the news, our organs get a story, they report it all the time. And so as a result, sometimes it makes it seem larger than it is. But if you look at the statistics, the opening article here and the opening paragraph illustrates my concern. At least 12 major U.S. cities have broken their annual homicide records in 2021, and there's still 3 weeks to go in the year. And so you look at some of these cities, probably one of the worst is Philadelphia, of maybe 1.5 million people, have had more homicides this year than the nation's two largest cities. That would be New York and Los Angeles. So that is a remarkable increase. If you print this out, and I would encourage you to do so, hold this up for those of you watching online, you can see that it shows a map of the country and begins to give you some of those ideas. The third largest city in the country is Chicago, and it leads the nation with 739 homicides, already up from what we had in 2020. And the deadliest year remains 1970, and we may not surpass that, but these are records for, in this case, many decades, but also in some cases, these are records, all-time records in some of these cities. You might wonder what some of those cities are, so I thought I'd rattle a few of those off. I've already illustrated two of those, and that's Chicago and Philadelphia. St. Paul, Minnesota. Does that ring a bell? Well, that's, of course, remember the George Floyd riots. Portland, Oregon. Well, you remember all the riots there. Tucson, Arizona. Toledo, Ohio. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Austin, Texas. Rochester, New York. Albuquerque, New Mexico, to mention just a few. And so you start looking at some of these and you recognize that these are cities. And I think there's always been this belief that if I live in a city, well, I'm sad about that, but I don't really go into the city, so I'm pretty safe. But all of this increase in the smash and grab looting and some of that causes people to recognize that even if I live in the suburbs, I might be dangerous. And as I go through this list, many of these particular cities or the suburbs surrounding them are places where we actually broadcast Point of View. So you might say, okay, why? Well, we don't have to guess at that either. This article takes you to Robert Boyce, who is a retired chief of detectives for the New York Police Department. He's also a commentator for ABC News. You may have seen him there before. And he says while there may be no single reason for the jump in slayings, there's one that really stands out to him. And he said, quote, nobody's getting arrested anymore. People are getting picked up for gun possession, and they're just let out over and over again. And as we point out in the booklet on criminal justice, if you allow people on the streets, well, then they can perpetrate more crimes. And an individual in prison or even in jail is not going to be able to commit those kinds of crimes. So that is the case. And lest you think he's only giving you anecdotes, the FBI crime data, which is also in this article, shows that the number of arrests nationwide plummeted by 24% in 2020 from the ones that happened in 2019. When the numbers do eventually come in for 2021, I predict that they will have dropped even significantly after that. There are some other reasons as well why we don't have as many arrests. It's because we don't have as many people in law enforcement. Christopher Herman, in this article, assistant professor of the Department of Law and Political Science in the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City, said the decrease in arrests could be attributed to the large number of police officers who retired or resigned in 2020 and 2021. No surprise there as well. The police executive research found that the retirement rate in police departments nationwide jumped by 45% in 2020 and 2021. Another 18% resigned, they found, and this coincided in many cases with all the so-called social justice protests and calls for defunding law enforcement agencies. And so there is a very direct link, I believe, between some of the rhetoric and what has taken place. Which now leads us to the third article, and this one talks about the fact that up until now, there has been real resistance in allowing Americans in certain locales to actually be able to get a firearm. But what has changed is the tremendous fear that is taking place, and Philip Riboli spends some time really just talking about the laws in the state of Illinois, where you have, especially in Chicago, some very stringent anti-gun laws. And in that particular large city of Chicago, which has had such a remarkable increase in the homicides, you've had more and more people that are actually wanting to see if they can arm themselves, because the hope that the police will protect them is pretty much vanished. And in the second page, he says it's hardly surprising then to learn that 40,000 plus law-abiding people in Illinois applied for a gun permit in little more than a 2-week period in June of 2020. That was a 500% increase over the same period the previous year. And so we can begin to see, as he quotes some of those facts and figures, quoting from the Chicago Sun-Times, that shootings are up 220% in downtown Chicago, which mirrors a citywide violent crime wave. And he uses the example that if you were actually having a fire and you wanted to then get a hose to put the fire out, but you couldn't get any water because the city determined that before you were allowed to actually put out a fire, you had to seek permission, and then you had to wait a few days. He illustrates that in some respects, that's kind of what some people in the city of Chicago feel in terms of their inability to be able to arm themselves. So I suspect perhaps more than ever before, the Second Amendment may be a really significant campaign issue in 2022, in simply because, as we can document in our second article, that we have a crime wave that in some cases and in many cities is setting an all-time record. And as a result, Americans are feeling that they live in a dangerous world and feel that maybe they have the responsibility to defend themselves rather than even hope that the police might show up. Love to get your thoughts about that. We have some more to cover, but what about this issue of crime, the Second Amendment, arming yourself? 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some calls right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Third article actually the fourth article we've posted on critical race theory. Very good piece by individual that we've had on the program before, Paul Kinger, and really kind of very balanced. So I appreciate that, and we'll get that in just a minute. But let's take some phone calls first. If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to California first. Adam, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hello. I just wanted to thank you for all your subjects and what you bring out and how we could conversate about what's going on in our world.
Well, thank you.
I wanted to comment about how people are going to weapons and violence more, and I just look at it at a biblical perspective that's what we're going to see if we don't have the common communication or faith in Jesus Christ. You know, it's just going to be more dependent on protecting ourselves and our loved ones and our material things, because we're not communicating that our neighbors, we don't even know them. Our neighborhoods, we rarely know anybody that lives next to us. And, you know, that's sad. And I think that's what makes us fear for not trusting each other, even as neighbors.
You've got some good points. Let me pick up each one of those. And the first is that we don't know our neighbors. One of the booklets I produced was on loneliness, and this is something that has been an ongoing trend. I mean, we had books years ago talking about the lonely American. We had the friendless American male. More recently, we had bowling alone. And probably even more recently, you have Senator Ben Sasse wrote in a book called Them. And those illustrate the fact that we oftentimes don't need our neighbors. We don't meet our neighbors. My wife and I walk twice a day, and that's given me a chance to meet so many individuals who are very different from us, both ethnically and theologically and the rest. And we have a very friendly neighborhood, but most people could not tell you the names of their neighbor to the left of them, to the right of them, in front of them, behind them. And that is, I think, the first issue you point out. The second is, I think, also illustrated by the fact that ultimately we would want people to have faith in Jesus Christ. Even a couple hours ago, I was on American Family Radio, and we're talking about how more and more young people fit into the category of unaffiliated, or we sometimes call them the nuns, atheist, agnostic, no preference. Well, if you don't believe that you are created in God's image, if you don't believe that you are accountable to a God, then you're going to have some of the kind of deviant behavior that takes place. And this whole Constitution and this whole government was based on the idea of Christian self-government, that individuals would do the right thing, because if once you get to a point where people no longer believe in God, don't believe that there's any justice, you can't put enough police officers at every corner to prevent a crime wave from taking place. So in some respects, I recognize that some of the crime wave is due simply to the fact that we've had such an emphasis on defund the police and all the rest. But behind that is a philosophy that says, do your own thing. There is no right or wrong. You have your truth and I have my truth. You have your ethics and I have my ethics. And that anarchy is one of the reasons why we see so much of it today. Of course, you can add to that the breakdown of the family and so much more. But my next caller, I think, wants to make that case. So rather than make it completely, let's go to Illinois, WPEO. Claudette, thank you for calling today. What would you like to share with our audience?
Well, I believe everything Kirby just said, and we should pray for our government and our leaders and things like that. But what I see in the breaking of the glass and of the fires and of the looting and of the absolute, I believe that these are people who are well-connected in these cities, well-connected to one another. And it just reminds me of the brown shirts of Germany. And they were very well-connected. They started all these things that scared people, and fear is a great way to control people, And I'm ashamed of our government. I'm ashamed that things are the way they are, because young people especially you think of children in these big cities being killed for no reason whatsoever.
So sad.
And yes, it is. And as a Christian, yes, pray for our government, pray for the leaders, pray for all these. But I wonder, Kirby, why is it that the Christians that are sitting in their churches every week don't call their senators, don't call their representatives, don't send letters, and don't let them know, don't be a part of this country, which was founded on our ability and our privilege of being, of having a say in our government. And I think if they did, there would be some kind of difference, I would think. And so I'm very, very concerned. My mother lived under Hitler for 5 years, and I learned a great deal from her. So I just see the steps coming, the anarchy, the doing nothing about these crime waves, doing nothing about, now the churches are being destroyed or defaced or whatever, and those are the steps. That's how it goes. And I think these crime waves are well organized.
And you can make that case very easily because we've seen videos of a van pulling up and all these signs coming out. And notice how these signs always look so well produced. And obviously they weren't produced within a few seconds of the, quote, grassroots protest. So we understand that. And you have really spoken to that, given the fact that your mother's experience reminds us that we should really, in this next election for you in Illinois, determine who you're going to send to Springfield, Illinois, determine who you're going to send to Washington, D.C., but more importantly, know who in the world is going to be running for district attorney, because I've said, when we have the pandemic and lockdown, a lot of people couldn't have told you who their county judge was, but once that county judge began to do some lockdowns, they all of a sudden knew who that was. With all the protests right now about critical race theory and the kinds of transgenderism and other things pushed in the schools, a lot of people didn't pay attention to who's on their school board. They know now. And with all this crime wave, I think you need to really pay attention to who your district attorney is and who's running for district attorney and what they think about this issue of crime, because what has happened in some areas, you live far enough away, because I believe WPEO is in Peoria, you live far enough away from Chicago, but it doesn't mean it won't be coming to your town too. And people that might be saying, well, I don't live in San Francisco and I don't live in Los Angeles, don't live in Chicago, and I don't live in Philadelphia. Yeah, but guess what? What happens there can happen in your own community if you don't turn some of that around and pay attention to who you've elected.
Yes, I believe that. And thank you so much for taking my call. And I listen to you every day. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for those comments. I might clip one or two of those out and play them again, because I think more people need to hear that. But just before we take a break, let me just mention that after the break, I want to give you just kind of a brief overview of this issue of critical race theory. Here's our booklet. We've been making this available for some time, but anytime I come across something that I think is really a valuable tool, it is our fourth article, and it's by Paul Kenger. Now, if you're not familiar with Paul Kenger, he's been on the program with us before. Dr. Kenger is a professor at Grove City College. By the way, I've said before, he may be one of the best reasons to send your student, whether it's your child or grandchild, to Grove City. It's a great school. And man, if you could study under an individual that has done so much good in terms of investigative reporting, and he really has become kind of the go-to expert on Marxism. And in particular, he's helpful with this idea of critical race theory. On the one hand, he wants to talk to some of these people on the left that say, critical race theory isn't being taught and all of that. And he gives a very good answer to that. But then on the flip side said, just because somebody is teaching about racial discrimination, teaching about Jim Crow, doesn't mean they're engaged in critical race theory. And then he also has a section which is really kind of aimed at our so-called liberal Christians that say just because you're concerned about the poor doesn't mean as a Christian you have to adopt Marxist ideas. And then he talks about the sad reality that when people go to find out about this, he says that the first article that usually pops up if you type in critical race theory on Google is Wikipedia, which is really just almost a deceptive article about that. So we won't be able to cover all of this material, but it may be one of the better articles I've ever seen on the subject of critical race theory. And so we'll talk about it briefly. I probably need to bring it up again next week because it was very well done. We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let me just mention that tomorrow will be our weekend edition. Kelly Shackelford will be with us and Dr. Merrill Matthews. Kelly Shackelford, of course, was at the oral arguments for this very important religious liberty case, which was before the Supreme Court, so we'll talk with him about that. Dr. Merrill Matthews has written a number of very good articles, and we will, of course, get a look at some more of these issues that are in the news. And if you'd like to join us, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. 888-938-1212. Let me get into the fourth and final article I wanted to mention today. It appears in the Stream. It was published earlier, so you can find it in a number of venues, but the most important thing is it's right there on our website, pointofview.net. Critical race theory, myths, Marxism, and more. He starts out by reminding us, of course, that this idea of critical race theory is perhaps one of the most divisive ideas that have surfaced in our country for some time. And first of all, he takes on those who claim that critical race theory isn't real. Nicole Wallace at MSNBC, for example, made headlines by saying critical race theory isn't real. And the context was that she was making the case that critical race theory was not being taught in the Virginia public schools, when, if nothing else, the evidence was pretty clear. But her argument was, well, conservatives were just manufacturing that to win elections. But actually, the revolt actually happened in Northern Virginia. I used to live in that area, and I know that what you're talking about there is a pretty highly Democratic district that was raising this question. So it doesn't really even pass the straight face test. But again, we have on more than one occasion pointed you to various articles that document the curriculum that was being taught. And more importantly, we've tried to provide some alternatives. And even here, he talks about the 1776 Unites Project. We've talked about Bob Woodson. We've actually interviewed him a number of times. Carol Swain. Of course, it also includes Shelby Steele and a number of others, all African Americans really wanting to set the record straight. And so he talks about the fact that this is not a myth and has really found a way to get into some of these issues and communicate it. But I want to move on because then, to his credit, and I really appreciate his honesty, he says, on the flip side, authentic forms of teaching about legitimate racial discrimination can get mislabeled as advocating for critical race theory, and that's wrong too. And so he talks about some of the things that he has taught and others at Grove City College have taught. Oftentimes, one of the readings that they have in the Western Civilization course. And that's another reason to go to Grove City College. How many state universities now even have a Western Civilization course, much less one that's required? But one of the things they are required to read is that letter from Reverend Martin Luther King from the Birmingham jail, which oftentimes I also encourage you to read on Martin Luther King Day. But again, that's another point. And then he points out that sometimes what he says is, my personal slogan is teach MLK, not CRT. That is Martin Luther King, not critical race theory. And he says clearly teaching about the sins and evils of slavery and racism does not ipso facto place one in the category of CRT writers like Robin DiAngelo, Kimberly Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, and Ibram X. Kendi. But nevertheless, he also uses this to then talk to some of his so-called left-wing Christians that think that, well, in order to deal with poverty, we have to accept this idea of critical race theory. And he says, if we want to help the poor, just follow the gospel and the teachings of Jesus. Why follow the militantly atheistic Marxism merely because Karl Marx talked about helping the poor? And he could have stopped there, but one of the things I appreciate about him, and he's pointed this out before in some of our interviews, is if you go and try to find out information, and I think last time we had him here, he was talking about the idea of cultural Marxism and said that if you go to Wikipedia, at least back then, I don't know if they've still done that, they'll sometimes refer to cultural Marxism as a conspiracy theory or something. I'm like, really? For somebody that took a class on Marxism from a socialist and has studied some of the writings by some of the so-called cultural Marxists, that would be Antonio Gramsci and others, I can tell you it's not a conspiracy at all. And so anyway, he says that when you type in critical race theory into Google, guess where you go? To Wikipedia. And then he gives you this printout. I won't read it in the interest of time, but his conclusion is this. this printout, this actual definition in Wikipedia, he says this is a sugar-coated definition. In particular, note that there is no explicit mention of Marxism, though for those who know, the mention of grounded in critical theory and listing of Antonio Gramsci, first among its proponents, tells you just that. Gramsci, the pioneering Italian Marxist, whose leading American scholar was, are you ready for this? Pete Buttigieg's father. That's right. The Secretary of Transportation's father is one of the leading American scholars of critical race theory, and in particular of cultural Marxism. Matter of fact, I think he was wasn't he a Gramsci scholar or something like that? Anyway, was the founder of the application of Marxism to culture, and that is cultural Marxism. And yet, if you search the words Marx or Marxism in the text of the Wikipedia entry for critical race theory, they do not even appear once. And so the point he's making is that even people wanting to maybe educate them about this issue will get this sort of sanitized, sugar-coated definition of critical race theory, which, by the way, is very different than some of the things we provide in this booklet on critical race theory. But then he concludes by, again, giving us some kind of a Christian perspective and said that Karl Marx saw people not as individuals made in the image of God, the Judeo-Christian conception of human beings in the image of God, but as groups to be shoved into opposing categories pitted against one another as foes. Marx did this according to class and economics, the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, whereas Marxist critical race theorists actually do this according to race, white versus black or other ethnic-based construction. And so he then ends with some really good comments, one from Dr. Wyatt T. Walker, who, by the way, is very close to Reverend Martin Luther King. He said, today, too many remedies, such as critical race theory, the increasing fashionable post-Marxist, post-modernist approach that analyzes society as institutional group power structures rather than on a spiritual one-to-one human level, are taking us in the wrong direction, separating even young school children into explicit racial groups and emphasizing differences instead of similarities. It says the roots of CRT are planted in entirely different intellectual soil. It begins with blocks, with each person assigned to an identity or an economic block, as in Marxism. And his final point is that this illustrates, again, one of the reasons why we also talk about social media, because he says this is what big tech has done. It not only controls the media narrative, but it even controls the meaning of words and terms. So, very good piece. It is the fourth article we've posted today on the website at pointofview.net. It is a resource that I would encourage you to take advantage of, and of course, we've posted it, and would encourage you to use that if you would like to know more about this very hot topic and controversial topic of critical race theory. Well, that's all we have for today, and so let me encourage you to go to the website. First of all, if you'd like to know a little bit more about the persecuted church, and in particular would like to connect up with Fellowship International Mission, it is FIM.org. And of course, we were privileged to have Dr. Paul Barreca and Dr. Dennis Shelly with us the first hour. We have information about everything from vaccine mandates, homicide rates, gun restrictions, and of course this one that we just mentioned on critical race theory. So take the time to find those resources, print them out, send them elsewhere, and educate yourself and people in your sphere of influence. I want to thank Andrew for his help as an engineer. I want to thank Steve for his help as a producer. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas recently said, "The Declaration of Independence has weathered every storm for 245 years. It birthed a great nation. It abolished the sin of slavery, and it endeavored to address its effects. While we have failed the Declaration time and again, and the ideals of the Declaration time and again, I know of no time," said Thomas, "when the ideals have failed us." While some see our founding as fatally flawed and promote ideas that have failed every time they've been tried, at Point of View, like Justice Thomas, we still believe in America's ideals. And if you do too, make a difference today. Join the Truth Team as we promote the unchanging truth that gave us liberty and prosperity. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. The original Americans responded to the call. Will you? Pointofview.net/team and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just